Okay, so hello everybody, and this is the latest of our series of education events. This one is on a topic we've been asked for regularly, and it started along the lines of, can we find out what cancer registration does? But of course, that's now embedded within an overall disease registration function, which moved lives, as Sam maybe will tell you in a second, into the overall disease registration process. So what we've got today is with many thanks, is Sam Winters is going to talk to us about the disease registration process in England. This is just England, but bear in mind that these are very, very similar processes in the rest of the UK. As ever, probably best to keep your microphones on mute, but if you've got a question at any point in time, just raise your hand or just say who you are, make a noise, wave, and we'll try and pick up questions as we go along. We also leave loads of time for questions and discussion at the end, so there'll be plenty of time to pick up and chat through with Sam any of the questions or things that come up today. So I shall now hand over to Sam, who's already got very efficiently his first slide up. Sam.
Doing my best. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for the invite to speak here again. It's been a long time since I was in one of these sessions, doing something productive years ago now. Can't remember what we did then, but hey. So yes, as Chris has alluded to, this is going to be a session sort of initially broadly talking about what is now disease registration and the National Disease Registration Service, or NDRS. And I'm going to try and cover a few bits and pieces. So what is NDRS these days? Because last time we spoke about it, it might have changed. It's probably changed, and we'll try and answer that question as best we can, but I'm not sure I know the answer these days. We'll have a look at some of the work that we do, stuff you might know about, stuff you might not. And then we're going to sort of practically talk about what people here do with data, I guess, in terms of what the analytical staff are doing, to give you an idea about what it's like on the ground level here. Talk about some of the organization's current challenges, and then, like I said, leave a big block of time for questions and discussion. And I'll warn you if questions are not forthcoming. I have some for you guys, so stay on your toes, maybe. We'll see how we do. I've got lots of questions for Alison. Oh, God, I hope she's prepared. All right, so National Disease Registration Service then. What is it? What do we do? And should we start with, what is disease registration? Disease registration then started in sort of like the 1950s-ish time or so. Original aim was sort of to bring together in one central place lots of different bits of data which related to a specific disease type. And initially that was cancer, but things have moved on a bit since then. And it's usually for diseases which are complicated, have long pathways, touch many different points of the healthcare service. And the aim is to bring these together to create a sort of more detailed and accurate patient record for these things. And then obviously the aim was to try and do something with that complicated data. And generally throughout time, there's been a bit of an analytical function attached to whatever form disease registration was in at the time. And obviously now, 2023, we're still here in some form. We have cancer and rare diseases and congenital anomalies as diseases we register, still broadly doing the same thing, get lots of data in, make the best record we can, do something sensible with it, which will help patients' lives in the long and short terms as best we can. And these days, the organisation as is sits within what is the new NHS England, which we'll maybe talk about a bit later on. So at a very broad level then, let's talk about what NDRS, National Disease Registration Service, does on its day-to-day. So you have the real world, right? You have the patient journey and what happens with its interactions with the healthcare system. And that journey, obviously, as I'm sure you all know, generates many, many points of data in lots of different data sets collected by lots of different people in lots of different ways for lots of different purposes, right? Across the pathway, you're touching hundreds of systems and making hundreds of data points relate to what's actually happening. And so, as I said, the disease registration service is there to sort of pull all of those together into one place, sort through them, and find the really important bits, find conflicts in data and things like that, and try and make one big, comprehensive, sensible record out of it all. And that's NDRS, National Disease Registration Service. And obviously, to do that, it's more than just a disease registrar sitting on the computer getting in records, right? We have a big technology team who deal with trying to extract all this data and get it flowing in from all the hospital systems. We have data liaison staff who go out and talk to trusts and system suppliers and things to say basically, oh, these are the things we'd like. Can your system send it in? And they tell us no, and then we have a fight with them for a while. And obviously lots of registration officers and teams dealing with molecular data, and analysts, and a whole host and then a wide variety of staff looking after this these days. But obviously there's not much point really just collecting data and making sure it's accurate and then sort of sitting on it and hoarding it like we're some sort of dragon hoarding gold. We need to do something with it. And that's where the analytical function, lots of our other functions come in. So we want to make sure that once we have this data, we're happy with it, it's used in sensible and safe ways to improve things across the board, right? And so there's lots of people that do that in NDRS. There's a lot of internal analysts who work on things, lots of metrics, lots of national statistics, some novel work. We do things like creating new data items out of the things we have in. We do lots of outputs and then data release stuff. Like I said, some of this is stuff that we do, so making dashboards and things like that. And we do a lot of data requests to organizations for research and a whole host of other purposes, which we'll talk about. Some very small and straightforward, some big and incredibly complicated. What you might have picked up on is that we try to sort of serve a relatively wide variety of audiences. We're not focused down one line, like we're not just doing things for like NHSE commissioning or like one group of researchers and things like that. It's a whole host of research types and different commissioners and charities and clinicians and also patients as well. So loads of data comes in, gets refined, and then goes out again in a lot of ways and for a lot of different purposes. And on the practical side of things, the organization looks a little bit like this. This is just a quick summary slide of what we are, basically. It's a few hundred staff. We're based all across the country. So we spend a lot of time on virtual calls like this with each other. We have hundreds of data items, which you get from around 500 different types of healthcare systems. And we produce a huge number of outputs in various forms each year. Some of those are routine and set to very specific schedules, and some are sort of ones-off and novel things. And in the bottom right of this slide, just a quick example of that. We've got the work that we did around cancer staging, so how far cancer's progressed and grown within the body. And this is some work we did quite a while ago now, trying to get the completeness of that particular data item up so we could start publishing a lot more statistics on it, looking at rare cancers and things like that. As I'm sure you're all aware, there's a lot that happens with the stage work. But obviously, I was going to say a few years ago, a bit more than a few years ago now, that data really wasn't in a state where we could do much with it. So that's just one of the examples of what the team sort of collaborates and works together to do. And as I said, we have a sort of rare diseases and congenital anomalies side to us now as well, not just cancer. And these teams are quite a lot smaller than the cancer one. They're sort of in relative infancy, I suppose. So fewer staff, but again, all across the country. Data from fewer suppliers and systems, about 240 different places sending in data for congenital anomalies and rare diseases. But obviously from the rare diseases side, they get information on thousands and thousands of rare diseases. I think 6,000 plus different types of rare disease they collect at the moment, a number which is ever growing. And one of their challenges is just identifying what the diseases are from the records they have in. But these two services, congenital anomalies and rare diseases from the cancer side, are a little bit like looking back in time, further and further, back to when we didn't have like a nice big database and flows and things. Data stored on spreadsheets sometimes is hard to handle and stuff like that. So they're going through things which we went through years and years ago. So maybe a chance to build something new with those and not repeat some of the things that we maybe have learned from as we've been building up the cancer side. But eventually they'll get to a point where they can report on similar things for all of those different disease types. And there's bits and pieces of that happening already. So it's something like the non-invasive prenatal testing data is something that our congenital abnormality side holds. That's a test where you're looking at the placental blood. You can examine the DNA of the fetus by looking at the blood of the mother, essentially, for anything that's up and anything that their parents might want to pay attention to. It's this brilliant new non-invasive test, which will soon be offered on the NHS, which is supported by our data. So that's big top-level overviews of the organisation as we are now. Do you want to? Anyone got any questions on those slides, or shall we move on?
Go on then. Go on then. I guess the thing I want to ask is the disease seems to focus on cancer, although I understand looking at it, there's, was it congenital anomalies or something? Is that cancer related as well?
No, so they're completely separate. So we have the cancer side, congenital abnormalities or anything which is happening sort of during pregnancy and then afterwards for like babies and toddlers.
Okay.
And that's a completely different set of diseases. I mean, there'll be cancers involved with some of those, unfortunately, but it's designed to collect a whole different host of conditions, like something like cleft palate, for example. And then rare diseases is rare diseases that aren't cancer, basically. Obviously, some cancers are rare, but taken as a whole, relatively prevalent, I guess. But yeah, rare diseases is, I'm not quite sure how they're defining the rare diseases for that service, but no,
Yeah,
it's separate from cancer.
We'll see whether or not obesity eventually gets classified as a disease. But the one observation I'd quickly make, okay, is that 75 years ago when the NHS came into being, you showed your first slide in 1950, and probably that's where the information came from. The two highest diseases that accounted for premature mortality, cancer was number 2. Where are we now? 75 years on, was cancer is still number 2. So I guess it shows the complexity of, doing the work that you're actually doing. There has been great advances, but the population's got bigger and the number of people, I guess.
Yep.
So the preventative work, but it'd be good to see what impact your service has had, other than just collecting data and you deciding to go over to NHS England, whether you had the choice or not.
I was going to say deciding.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, don't worry, they're the data controller, so I know where to go. Thank you.
Good. Yes, I'm not sure I know where to go. Yeah, good comment. What can we say about that? I think there's a lot that's changed on the data side of things. And there's a lot that we know. And if we hadn't collected the data, we wouldn't know about it and be able to action lots of it. And I'll show you some of the examples of that as well, where some of this data has an actual effect on things like real world numbers in detecting cancer and things like that, especially on the prevention side. Because we do, I mean, prevention, there's a lot of that in some of the screening programs, especially the bowel screening program, which we do some work to support. But yeah, we can maybe revisit that question and those comments a bit later. Cool. Should we look at some of our actual work then, some of the practical stuff we do? So one thing we provide is the national statistics on cancer. And these are essentially the definitive national numbers for newly diagnosed cancers, for deaths and mortality statistics, and survival as well. And this is essentially, national stats are basically one place that you can go to say, all right, what's the absolute numbers and what's the most sort of well-reviewed, statistically robust stuff which we have. So these things have been peer-reviewed to the nth degree, and we're very confident in what we provide for these. And so if we want to do something definitive on survival rates and things like that, and these are the statistics that we're going to look at. So when hopefully you see figures talking about cancer survival improving, they're being drawn from the national statistics which we produce these days. And that's a big part of our work. This is probably one of the highest profile routine things that we do. And there's lots of different releases for these at different levels. So geographic, lots of different cancer sites, survival by cancer stage and things like that. And one of the ambitions would be to work up things like congenital anomalies and rare diseases one day to do something similar for those things and provide that information back out there to the public and people who need it. And alluding back to your question then, some of the practical stuff, I said we do a lot of stuff on data release, and we support a wide range of programs with data release, so not just for researchers to do papers which might be buried in journals somewhere, things that are bigger and have a much more prominent focus. So you've probably seen in the news lots of stuff on the blood test for cancers. And this is the GRAIL and the Gallery studies. We do a lot of work supporting them and providing lots of data to track their patients and to provide all the things that the registry collected back to them as quickly as possible, so they can do lots of things to see if their tests are running as they would expect. And this feeds into things like the peer review papers that they publish. So our data is helping to see, is the test detecting what they think it is, and is it good at doing that? And obviously that test seems to be coming along quite well, so very pleased to support something like that. And then there's a completely other angle to some of this thing, right? We're very interested in getting cancer data out to lots of different groups. And obviously, historically, there's big publications on things like breast, colorectal, prostate, and bowel cancers. But we're interested in doing things for the smaller cancer sites and the rarer cancers as best we can. But obviously, we're not just here to send whatever data out that people want. We do have sort of custodian role, right? Whatever we're publishing, we want it to be safe for people to see. We don't want to potentially identify someone from it again. And so we have a project called Get Data Out. And this is designed in a very clever way to safely release more granular figures for smaller cancer sites. And so you can break things down for these sites. So you can look at, in this example, brain tumors, and you can get a smaller, more granular detailed site for that. And some of those you can break down by age, and then some of those you can potentially break down by geography. And then again, where numbers allow and where it's safe to do. So this information is all public. And it's just something we try and put out there for some of the smaller sites to provide information. Well, fairly straightforward statistics, just hasn't been available before. And the methodology behind that is a bit more simple than what I'm showing here, because it's quite complicated to keep it safe and provide information for it. This has been one of our focuses, to sort of support the need for some of the rarer cancers, and make sure that just the big ones are all things that always steal a limelight in terms of where we're channeling our resources. And final example of a piece of work then, something called rapid cancer registration. And this is a piece of work which we had, which sort of challenges some of the conventions which we have. And you may or may not know, but obviously the registration process takes quite a while to get all its data in and through all of our systems and get it out again. So things like the national statistics, which are published on that registration data, cover 2020 at the moment. And obviously we're sort of 3-ish years out from 2020. And this became more of a problem during the COVID pandemic, because the registration didn't have up-to-date figures to provide to see what impact the pandemic was having on cancer patients. And so we needed to come up with something which was a lot more timely than what we had before. And so this dataset was created, the Rapid Cancer Registration Dataset. And what it is more timely, but it's a sort of proxy cancer dataset, right? An approximation as best we can get it. So it uses data in the registration systems as soon as it hits it, and then compares that to things like hospital episode statistics and cancer waiting times, which tend to be more up to date, to try and sort of triangulate in on fact of cancer and type of cancer and things like that. So there aren't as many data items in this data set, but it is a lot more timely than the stuff which we would do with sort of like the gold standard registration data set. And this was used for loads of things, obviously during the pandemic, as well as things like the shielded patient list. It is carrying on today as well, where you can get a sort of approximate look at more recent things. And at the moment, it's a bit hard to read, but it's going up to sort of February 2023. So a lot more current than gold standard registration. Like I said, fewer data items and maybe loses a little bit out on the accuracy. But we provide this in addition to that as well. So all those things are there. That's an example of fewer outputs. Next, I was going to talk about a day in the life of an analyst. So, you know, the people using lots of this data, what is it they actually do? Do you want to have a pause and talk about the work, or should we leave that and shall I continue? I'll have a drink in the meantime.
Sam, there's one question that Brenda put in the chat, which was about whether the registry reports the type of disease back to the doctors or the consultants, or do they record them separately? Do you want to pick that up?
So we don't report it sort of directly and personally back to them, although they have a few ways into the system to see what we've got. The feedback loops that we have are more on like the larger scale data management side. So they go to people like submitting the data sets and things like that. Like some of our work at times feeds into like decision support tools and things like that. But in terms of an area that could be mined for usefulness, that's one of the areas which remains a little bit untouched. Like all of our feedback systems, I guess, are a little bit outdated. Like even going back to sort of commissioners and things like that, which is a much higher level than like GPs and doctors and trusts. We don't necessarily supply as much as other systems do again. And one of the big reasons for that is like timeliness for things. As I was saying, it takes a long time to sort of get everything through the system, whereas clinical staff probably want things back in terms of like doing treatment and things a lot faster. And so speed is one of the things definitely that stymies us there, as well as sort of sorting out all the data flows and things like that.
Thanks, Sam.
Sorry, I don't have to chat up. I've got 3 monitors, but clearly it's not enough to do all of this. That's why I'm looking the other way and rather at you guys. Everything's all over the place. Cool, hope it helps for now. We can always revisit it. So I'm going to do day in the life of an analyst then. So we're going to do a chart because I'm an analyst, right? Bottom of this is time of day, morning, midday, afternoon. On the side, what I've called relative analytical ability. How good am I at doing my job? Most days we start with a drink, we're doing okay. Then we have a meeting, things go downhill. Have another drink, we're doing well. Meeting, things quite bad. Drink, we're doing okay. Another meeting, oh dear. Drink with a capital D, finish off the day. There you go, typical analyst day. What's next? No, it's not quite like that. What do I feel like most of my days are these days? What we do is, I suppose, a bit like a buffet, right? There's more stuff to eat than we're ever going to get through. So we're going to have to choose carefully what we do. And there's some things on this that, you know, some people like to eat, some people don't like to eat, some people like to have more of it, some people like to have less of it, some people aren't hungry, some people want dessert. The point here is that there's a load of projects to do, not that many people to do them, and they're all going to be doing a big variety of things on any one day. So when we talk about a typical day, there's probably no such thing because it swings around so much based on what's going on and what are the priorities. So we're going to have a bit of a stab as best we can. But like I said, there's no such thing really as an average. So a typical analyst is going to be doing a large selection of things, right? They might have a number of internal projects that are NDRS priorities to do. Some of this could be working on our databases. So they might be on there to extract some data out of it. And we want to split that by quality metrics, for example. So that can be put into a written report. They might be working with a tool called R, which is an analytical tool, and they might be using that to build one of many interactive dashboards that you see online, which might be public facing. Or they might be spending a bit of time doing a draft or a peer review paper, talking about, I don't know, some of the treatment stuff which we've been examining or something like that. And that could be all internal, or that could be collaborating with an academic institution, something like that. Every analyst is going to have an aspect of what's called QA, quality assurance. Basically, anything we do needs to be checked by at least one other person to make sure it has a decent amount of integrity and quality. So this analyst in particular, for example, might be checking the code which is used to create, as well as the actual output for an update for our cancer staging tool, for example. So they might be looking at the code which goes into building that on the back end, as well as looking at the data which was pulled out of the database for it. And then looking at the front end of it, right? The stuff that you would see when you go onto our websites and have a look at it, and just making sure like all the bits and pieces of that work, are there any typos, things like that. So a wide range of things in quality assurance and a wide range of projects that they can check across the team. Everyone's going to be doing something on data release. And again, there's a lot which happens across the data release pathway. So this analyst might be working on an external request for data from a customer. They might be taking their time agreeing with that particular customer, sort of what fields would be useful for their research. So the customer might have sent in a draft of the project which they're doing. And the analyst would go through sort of like some of the data specifications we have, talking about the fields which would be useful for that, or things that might not be useful for that, trying to make sure that this person requests the right things to help their study. Advice and consultancy, we do a lot of stuff along these lines. So many of our analysts are leads and subject matter experts in particular areas. And some of that could be for specific cancer site groups, some of it could be for specific data sets. So we have some analysts, for example, who've worked for many years and are experts on the cancer waiting times data set. And so if we have internal questions and projects using that, then that analyst is going to be spending some time fielding those and answering those. But they'll also be pulled into external things based on that. So, you know, if there's parliamentary interest, say, in something with cancer waiting times, then our lead on that data set might spend a bit of time dealing with some communications and things and clarifications from that. And then I talked about this very first, but meetings, we have a lot of meetings, maybe too many, but hey. And some of these could be catch-ups in like smaller teams to talk about prioritizations of work for the coming month, or they could be whole team meetings around organization we're going to be transitioning to next. A wide selection of things there. Challenges, any questions on day-to-day bits, or should we talk about what we're finding hard at the moment?
Sam, there's one question which Francesco raised, which is about where the data is stored, making the point that the disease registration service, which includes cancer registration, was originally part of, well, it's been part of different organizations over the years. Most recently, Public Health England, then into NHS Digital, then into NHS England.
Yep.
And do people have the opportunity to opt out? I'll probably answer that on your behalf. So cancer registration, if you talk about cancer and other disease registration, is covered by a legal process that says the country needs to do this, needs to have a function to count this stuff, like notifiable diseases, for instance. So the law has been there, it's been there for a long time within the NHS Act. The organisation which is tasked to do that has changed. So as I said, it was Public Health England, then to NHS Digital, and then to NHS England. So whilst the legal framework is exactly the same, you're quite right that the data is held by a different legal body, but all those are covered by the same legal framework, legal gateway. And that's really why there was no real communications out to people to say, this organisation, you held your data, it's now changed to this organisation. They've done the same with name changes in the past. It's not the sort of thing that gets advertised. You could argue there needs to be more publicity, more communications about those big things, but I think that's probably outside probably outside Sam's agenda, I would suggest. So I hope that's useful. I'd really like to thank Sam for the time he's put into this and for the team behind him as well. Give him my best. But as ever, any questions, any comments, any suggestions for future events, just sling them our way and we can put those on. But yeah, thank you for your time. We'll get the recording done and chopped as soon as we can and make it available on the website. We'll put that notification out in the newsletter as well.
Fantastic. But yeah, thank you for the invite.
Thank you, everybody.
I hope that was useful.